Welcome to PCN's coverage of the 2024 general election. I'm Phil Beckman, and we are at the Center of Academic Engagement at Mercyhurst University in Erie, Pennsylvania. And this is a special college election panel that PCN is doing around the state. And our topic today is the legalization of marijuana. Our panelists are, at the far end, we have Dan Bartkowiak, Communications Director for the Pennsylvania Family Institute, Kara Jeffers, Pennsylvania State Capitol reporter with Erie News Now, Rob Greene, District Attorney of Warren County, and Joe Morris, Chair of the Political Science Department here at Mercyhurst University. But we're also joined by students who are here as well, and we definitely want to hear the views and opinions of our students as part of our discussion today. If you'd like to learn more about PCN's coverage of the election, go to pcntv.com. Now, Joe, over time, we see lots of trends in the electorate and people viewing things that in the past were perhaps not acceptable, become acceptable over time. Now, when we talk about marijuana, it's been an illegal drug for many years. What kinds of trends have you been seeing over, say, the past decade or so?
Well, the changes have been dramatic, to say the least. This is a topic that has been of interest to many people across the United States, but we actually started tracking the legalization of marijuana, public opinion with regard to the legalization of marijuana back in 1969. And what we found is that back in 1969, only about 12% of the American population supported it. And this number increased slowly through 1977, but then began to decrease with the war on drugs in the 1980s and early 90s. But by the time we get to the mid-90s, the story has been one of a slow but steady and at times very dramatic increase in public support for the legalization of recreational marijuana. So today we find ourselves at a point nationally where between 6 and 7 out of every 10 adults nationwide support recreational marijuana. The story is very similar in Pennsylvania. Just 10 years ago, the Mercyhurst Center for Applied Politics did a statewide poll of voters and found that only about 48% favored the legalization of recreational marijuana. But today, in recent polling, that number is up around 80%. So we have seen a dramatic change on this topic, and it seems to be one that is enduring.
Now, Rob, we, from a law enforcement perspective, we start to see things gradually changing. So we have medical marijuana and then the decriminalization efforts. Can you talk about how those changes have taken place over time, and what does that mean for law enforcement?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Mass confusion is what is going on in law enforcement right now because of the legalization that's now surrounded Pennsylvania with recreational use, because of the Delta 8 hemp issue where you're buying intoxicants at gas stations, because of DAs like myself that agree that legalization should take place and support the legalization of recreational use marijuana. Law enforcement is somewhat perplexed on how to handle cannabis situations. Are we arresting people for it? Are we throwing them in jail when more than half the population agrees that cannabis should be legal? How fair is that? What about people that are already in jail for distributing and they're serving time? So how it's affected law enforcement? Law enforcement, for the most part, is ignoring you got some law enforcement officers and district attorneys, and they follow the lead of the district attorneys of their county, and they're following the example that the district attorney's setting. And some counties, they arrest you for a small amount and punish you to the strictest, hardest letter of the law. Some counties, like myself, look at it a little bit differently. That being said, I still have a duty to the people, and it is still illegal if you don't have a medical marijuana card. So usually I either would change it to a disorderly conduct, or now what I'm doing is people are still pleading guilty to the small amount of marijuana, but it's costing them about $500 to $700 in a fine. They don't lose their license now because that changed in Pennsylvania, but they do plead to a small amount of marijuana if it's cannabis that is bought illegally or they don't have a card for, and therefore they're paying $500 to $700 in fines for having that marijuana on them, which to me is not fair and appropriate, but I'm kind of in a quandrum myself. I'm confused myself on what exactly to do and how to handle it, because it's going to be legal in Pennsylvania. We all know that. It's going to be legal. It's legal in every state around us. So at this point, how do we prosecute it? And that's the main thing I see with law enforcement. And there's a lot of support for legalization. They don't want to have to, they being officers, don't want to have to waste their time and resources on prosecuting cannabis and going after cannabis. That being said, it is a precursor, and a lot of times when you find cannabis, you also find meth and heroin, and that's what they use marijuana for, is not to arrest people for marijuana, but as a prerequisite to get into the door to try to find meth or heroin, because some people that use cannabis also, or deal in cannabis, also deal in other things that are extremely bad for you.
Kara, in February, Governor Josh Shapiro called for the legalization of marijuana as part of his budget plan. What is the significance of somebody like the governor of a state calling for this, and what impact did it have on the actual budget process?
It definitely says something for, our leading elected official in the state to set that precedent of, we want to get something done on this. We want to unconfuse everyone in the law enforcement area. In order for that to be accomplished, it needs to happen at the state level of passing these laws, again, set that statewide standard, that statewide consistency. Governor Josh Shapiro did bring that up in his budget address. It was one of those things that really did not get touched. There was multiple hearings on it throughout the spring and the summertime, trying to look at the different aspects of this, from criminal justice to the business side of thing. We have to look at, if we're going to give out licenses, what does that look like for businesses, for small business owners, and social equity coming into play with that as well. There are still concerns about the health issues. So we've had multiple panels on this, multiple hearings on this at the state level, and there has been different bills and legislation introduced. None of them have gotten traction. I think there's enough people that are still dragging their feet on, still concerns on if they want to do it at all. And you also have other people that, hey, we want to get this done, but there's disagreement on how that should go into play. And Pennsylvania is known for making things more complicated than they need to be at times when it comes to legal systems and practicing that out in the general legislature. So it did not happen this year. We will see if it happens next year. If it's going to happen next year, it's something that those conversations really need to be starting now, because that's part of the beauty of law and democracy and getting elected officials in there. It does take time to do things right. That does mean you have to put the time in to get anything done. So,
Yeah, and as the changes in public opinion have taken place over the years, and there is that sense, as Rob says, a sense of inevitability here, how do those trends look to you?
Well, I think if you look at the changes, I would say the industry of marijuana and the products that are being used, that's a huge part of the reason why public health should be a priority. 20 years ago, I was starting college, and potency level, dry flower, smoking it, was single digit. So the psychoactive component of marijuana, THC, single digit THCs. Today, you're seeing, the industry saying, hey, 30% is the new 20%. You're seeing a huge increase, the chemically altered, marijuana products that are there. Now, on top of the flower, you have concentrates, edibles. 20 years ago, when I was starting college, those weren't around. No one was vaping. So nowadays, you have 60, 70, 80. You can have 90% THC in these concentrates that are being vaped. That is having a significant impact. It's very different. It's a vastly different market that we see today versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago. That needs to be held to account. And I think when it comes to public health, that should be something that is prioritized. And so when it comes to even law enforcement, the collective voice of law enforcement here in Pennsylvania are opposed to the legalization for recreational use. It's because of the public health concerns. You're seeing a rise in whether it's the states experimenting with legalization, car accidents, mental health concerns, from children ending up in ERs from ingesting it to, frankly, psychotic and mental health issues. There's a variety of concerns that are coming up because of this new industry. You have a commercialized product, an industry that's trying to profit, frankly, from those that are using a more addictive nature of marijuana. Marijuana can be addictive. It can absolutely be harmful, and that should be what drives the conversation versus any type of a revenue generator.
Rob, one of your fellow district attorneys from Northumberland County, Michael O'Donnell, he has said that criminalization delegitimizes the legal system. Do you agree with that? And if so, how does that work?
That criminalization
delegitimizes the legal system.
That's ridiculous. A couple things. One, to say that there's mental health concerns, back in the 1930s, Harry Anslinger said, and I'm going to say what he said, he was the one that started the prohibition against marijuana. Why did they start prohibition against marijuana? Because blacks used it and Mexicans used it. Harry Anslinger said that it makes darkies think they're as smart as whiteys. Harry Anslinger said that it will make white women want to sleep with black men. And that continues till today. Not that extreme, but there is a racial component to it. Now, along with that came the mental health schizophrenia that marijuana and cannabis causes schizophrenia and causes mental health issues. That's been proven false. But still today, it's used by people that are against the legalization of cannabis. Now, can overuse all the time with anything be bad for your health? Absolutely. The same with cannabis, the same with the Big Mac from McDonald's. That being said, to say that it's a negative to the criminal justice system to legalize cannabis, well, then why is alcohol legal? Why don't we just, why do we let people drive? Because, my God, people get killed in car accidents and bad things happen to people when they drive. Or why that with alcohol, look what happens with people who drink alcohol. You ask any officer, and I guarantee you 100 out of 100, unless they're not telling the truth, will tell you they would rather arrest someone that's high on cannabis than drunk, because that person that's high on cannabis isn't going to cause a problem. I keep hearing all these harmful side effects of cannabis. Well, I am a medical marijuana user. I am an advocate and a patient of medical marijuana. I came out last December and let everyone know that. I figured it wasn't fair for me to use cannabis and to also be the district attorney of a county. I wanted to let my constituents know that's what I'm doing, and that's what I have, and I'm an advocate for it. To say that it's I forget the exact word they use, but to say that it affects the criminal justice system in a negative way and puts it in a bad light is ridiculous. What about freedom? I guarantee you every one of those cops think freedom is important. And why can't I use cannabis that is much more less dangerous than alcohol? Everyone agrees with that, except for a few. Why is it that because I have a medical marijuana card, when I drove here this morning, I drove illegally? Why? Because I have cannabis in my system. I'm not high, I'm 100% completely sober, but technically I could be arrested and prosecuted for a DUI because I have metabolites in my system. I can't have firearms because I have cannabis in my system. What about freedom? And to say that it's a thwart or a bad thing for the criminal justice system, I think just the opposite. It's actually a champion. I feel like a champion carrying a sword and saying, okay, we're going to legalize and get freedom back to the people rather than take away rights from people because we think it's bad. And God forbid, Big Pharma, people stop using prescriptions, stop using alcohol, because cannabis, not only is it it's a harm reduction, and actually the harms are so small compared to the benefits they're finding in cannabis. To me, it's a no-brainer.
I have to add, I think just to look at those health harms, I think what you're pointing, if there's no harm with this, somebody like
I didn't say no, I said minimum.
There's a state representative in Colorado, Judy Amabile. She has been vocal in their state that is experimenting with recreational use in making some limits on marijuana policy. Her son is addicted to marijuana. He had his first psychotic break at age 18. He spent 6 weeks in the hospital, tens of thousands of dollars treatment. Nothing worked. She says he's broken and he's lost. And she looks at how prevalent marijuana has been in their state, the concentrations in edibles that have been prevalent throughout, and the rise in potency. You talk to State Representative Amabile, she knows the health harms. It's a very real thing. Every major health association in this nation is opposed to the recreational use of marijuana. Why? It's especially because of those health harms. You talk with these families. Laura Stack, her son killed himself after being addicted to marijuana. It's a very real thing. We sadly have state representatives, even in the state, that will go around saying it's harmless, it's not dangerous, it's not addictive. This is a literal quote, the only thing at risk, he says, with legalization are potato chips, because of you alluding to the munchies, to kind of get a laugh out of it. This isn't a laughing matter. This is very real. If we look at today's industry, you have a profit-driven industry using these highly addictive products, 60, 70% THC. It's so different than in the past. This isn't the weed of Woodstock days. It's very real for many of these families. I continually run into moms and dads that are trying to figure out how to deal with their kids that are addicted solely to marijuana. Treatment facilities, Karen Treatment in Pennsylvania, Kate Appleman, I was on a debate with. She talks about today's marijuana. I'm seeing people coming into my facility addicted solely to marijuana. You can roll your eyes all you want, Rob. This is a very real thing. And there's families, including mine, that are dealing with this type of issue. And it's not something to just glance over and dismiss.
Just a quick rebuttal.
Thank you. A lot of people have medical issues that cause them to, God forbid, and I feel horrible about her son committing suicide. A lot of people have medical issues that make you do things that are schizophrenic. And those people will use cannabis at the same rate or higher rates than people that don't. It's not the cannabis. You're looking at what's the cause. And what people, with all due respect, will do is they'll see someone uses cannabis, but there's an underlying medical issue or mental health issue, and they blame the cannabis. That has been proven false over and over and over again. But how do we do that? Prove it false? Because technically, because it's Schedule 1, we can't legally research it. Well, we are now, and we're doing it in Pennsylvania and lots of other states that are, even though federally it's technically legal to research cannabis without DEA approval, but it's not, it's a cause and effect. Just because someone uses cannabis, someone could be drunk and high driving down the road, gets in a crash, and they say cannabis caused it. There could be someone that God forbid, that lady in California who stabbed her husband on 120 times, they're blaming cannabis. But no one checked her blood. No one checked to see if that cannabis was laced with fentanyl. No one even found the cannabis because it was gone. But that's what she said happened. And people get on a crusade that are so anti-cannabis because it's the devil's lettuce that they use those as their sword, just like he just did. It's causing so many harms. How is that causing the harm? Prove to me that the cannabis is what caused it. What we're doing is researching that and finding that it's not the cannabis that causes it, and it's actually cannabis that's helping veterans with PSD and helping people with depression and helping people with anxiety. And it's being beneficial, just the exact opposite, because people have preconditions and they use cannabis doesn't mean the cannabis caused the problem. And that's what the research is starting to show now. But it's arguments like that that are heartfelt and people think, oh my God, we can't legalize a drug. It's highly addictive and it's going to make them kill themselves. That's, to use Trump, fake news. But
It's interesting that he brought up the case in California. I'll say just briefly, Bryn Spriker, that's the woman that stabbed her boyfriend dozens of times. She was brought in, tried, there was no question that she killed her boyfriend. But the issue was they brought in a psychiatrist and found she had taken high potency marijuana right before that. She thought she was afraid for herself. She started stabbing herself, her dog. But it was marijuana induced psychosis.
what she says,
But she was charged with it. She was charged with involuntary manslaughter.
because she stabbed the guy 120 times.
This is our
Blame
criminal
marijuana.
justice system.
Gentlemen.
This is an opinion. This was something that a judge said, yes, cannabis-induced psychosis is something that is what you're being charged with. So we're starting to see that in the criminal justice system using weed-induced psychosis. That was the LA Times headline.
That's wrong.
It's weed-induced psychosis. You can say it's wrong, but that's the criminal justice
Fake
system.
news.
So
We're
I want to pull our picture back a little bit here and talk about some of the trends that we've been seeing. Joe, you talked earlier about some of the surveys over a period of decades. Are those generational trends? Are you seeing younger generations changing their views, or how does that work out?
Yeah, actually, the younger generations, of course, are more supportive of legalization of marijuana. But that's really, we have to kind of take a step back. And if we take a kind of bird's eye view of this, there's widespread support across parties, across genders, across all demographics. Although the majority of people that are supporting the legalization of marijuana are more liberal ideologically, a plurality of people within the more conservative ideology also support the legalization of recreational marijuana. So the support is broad and I think fairly deep. But one thing I was thinking about while we were having this conversation is the fact that Pennsylvania, if it is inevitable that Pennsylvania is going to legalize recreational marijuana, we're in a really good spot. There's advantages to being first a lot of time. Pennsylvania is definitely not first on this topic. There are 24 states plus DC that have legalized recreational marijuana. But the benefit of coming a little bit late is that we have a federal system, which means states have a great deal of autonomy deciding how they're going to deal with the legalization of marijuana. We have 24 experiments that have unfolded, some for more than a decade, in the various states. Pennsylvania is actually in a really good position to have a great conversation. And if it turns out we do legalize recreational marijuana, to be in a position to have a really good approach to the legalization of marijuana. We can learn from California. We can learn from Washington, from Colorado, from Maryland, from now Ohio, New York. And we can decide collectively whether we believe adults should be able to grow marijuana plants in their house for personal use. We can decide whether marijuana should be smoked in public. We can decide at what rate we should tax marijuana. Should it be 15, 20, 25%? Where do we tax it in this process? So I think Pennsylvania is in a really, really good place to have this debate. Whether or not what route we choose to go is entirely up to us, but we are definitely in a good place to have an informed debate.
Kara, as you've been covering the state government on this issue and you've attended rallies and hearings, what types of concerns were you hearing from participants in some of these events?
Yeah, I think there is just lots of concern about the inconsistency. I know you had mentioned that with medical marijuana right now, you can't own a gun, you can't drive, there's different expectations with that. I think it is also an interesting conversation about this is a wide variety of marijuana, right? Marijuana is just not one type of thing. It's not just the edibles, it's not just the plant. It's expanded into a very large industry, very many options. And so that's where you do get lots of concerns of people pigeonholing into one type of thing, concerned only about their perspective on what has become a very multifaceted and large issue. When it comes to, I know licensing was one of the policy areas that I went to. There's concerns, like you said, about social equity for the populations that have an adverse impact on them from, we talk about if you've had higher arrest rates, then how should that be acknowledged? Do we give everyone, release everyone from prison and you don't clean your record now? That's like one topic of the conversation. There's also conversations about if we are going to go with making this all part of business, do we make sure that, again, those populations that we say have those adverse impacts, how can we make sure they're getting a slice of the pie when it comes to, running a business on that? And this is something that, as we're looking at the wide variety of how this product can be brought out, there is a lot of regulation that as states have put this into place. There's very specific ways that you have to go forth and set up a marijuana shop, right? And that means that's expensive. It's not something that, you can just start a marijuana business in your backyard very easily. You have to go through lots of loops and different conversations. So how do we make that accessible to different populations that had that adverse impact? So I know that's some of the conversations that I've been hearing. I think really at these rallies, it's the inconsistency. They don't know with medical marijuana, that's opened the door for lots of people to have access, but there's still concerns about, what is medical, what is not, what can I do even with a medical license? Can I afford to get this? There are people who say if it's so easy to get a medical marijuana license, why do we even have to worry about the recreational side of things if that's already been created and accessible for people? So that's just some of the things that I've been hearing.
Now, with legalization comes commercialization.
Yes.
And this area, New York, legalized marijuana. And how does this area here is adjacent to New York? So in your experiences, what are you seeing in New York State regarding the commercialization of marijuana? Whoever wants to.
Well, so I think, when we look at Pennsylvania, we have a medical program, as you've been outlining. And I think in very much respect, there is a commercialized product there because you have 85% THC concentrates that are flavored in raspberry rain and cherry crush. There's these things that you'd almost view that as seeming like more on a recreational use of this. And so I think with the medical, there's certainly some improvements that are needed. I think when we look at our state, we often think, it's a prescription that you're going to go to get a medical and here's the dosage, here's the product that you're getting. No, we have it where you get a medical card and then you essentially can get what you want. You can go into these dispensaries. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I think there's improvements that could be made with our medical program. But yes, you're looking at states from around us. I think you're seeing the illicit market continues to thrive. I'm seeing advertisements from New York, and New Jersey where, Halloween's coming up. They're having parties where they're using Disney princesses. They're using, hey, come on in and we're going to have a Halloween party. There's just things that are very appealing to people my age and younger. And so I think there's definitely the concerns with a commercialized product that we're seeing in some of these states, going by billboards that, got weed, showing products that frankly are appealing to kids. I think that's what you see with commercialization. That's what we see on the West Coast, what you see in Colorado, and it's starting to infiltrate in some of these states that are experimenting with legalization.
Go ahead, Ray.
If I may, I completely agree. I mean, we're not going to argue the whole time, I guess. I completely agree with them that the medical marijuana program in Pennsylvania is basically a recreational program. It's not prescription. It's you get a card, you have whatever ailment you have, and with anxiety, PTSD, whatever it may be. And it's very easy to get a medical marijuana card. But everyone thinks, okay, now I'm on a list. Now I'm going to lose my guns. Now I can't drive. So what they do is they're worried about, and what Kara was talking about, they're worried about their job. What if someone finds out that I use marijuana? What do you think my wife thought when I said I'm coming out? Well, when I came out and said, I have a medical marijuana card and I'm an advocate for marijuana, and now I'm going to sue the federal government for taking my guns. I'm still married, thank God. She loves me, but we're good. And it's been since December of last year. But there's that worry inside. And with regards to the kids, absolutely. There are rules and regulations, but we need sensible regulations. It should be treated very similar to alcohol or tobacco or something along those lines, where it's regulated, where kids should be able to have it, but responsible adults should be able to use it without having to worry about their guns or driving rights being taken away. But you shouldn't drive when you're high. Absolutely not. The high THC, that was one reason I started using marijuana again, because I didn't use marijuana during the time I was the district attorney. When I was elected, I used a lot before that. When I became the DA, I stopped until Delta 8 came out, and I heard about this hemp thing, and I started using that. Then I realized, oh my God, it's completely unregulated. No one knows what's going on. So I got my medical marijuana card in 2022. What I was worried about is that the regulations are so important to make sure you're getting what you're supposed to get. The medical program should be for medical, specifically, should be prescriptions, not for just you get a recommendation and use it as you want. And these high THC things, one of my chiefs of police that's completely anti-same should be sitting on that end of the table, and we're good friends, been friends since we were kids. He's adamantly against using marijuana. He calls it the devil's lettuce, and it's horrible. That being said, one of his biggest arguments was it's the high THC is now it's so prevalent, it's 80%. Well, and how do I know? I didn't use it when it was 80%. So I use it, and I have used it now. It's not a whole lot different. But should there be a regulation with the high THC? Absolutely. It needs to be regulated, but you can't regulate it until you legalize it, because right now we're in a state of chaos. Legalization will help all these issues that are being brought up by the other side. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for adult use legalizing regulation. Legalizing marijuana.
I'm sorry. Joe, anytime we make big changes like the legalization of marijuana, you have to build institutions surrounding that to enforce, to regulate. From a political science point of view, how do you build robust institutions to be able to do that for something that's been illegal for so long?
Well, that's a great question, and it's undoubtedly difficult to do. But again, I would just say that we're not going this alone. We have more than a decade of data from other states where we have watched slowly through trial and error states legalize marijuana and then deal with the issues that emerge from that. So there are many good models out there for regulating this. None of them are perfect, but Pennsylvania has a good place to start. Having said that, again, it's very, very challenging to begin anew and newly regulate things. But we have a long history in the United States of doing exactly that. I mean, we can go back more than 100 years when the size of our government exploded with regulation as a result of the Great Depression and the New Deal, we set up institutions all of the time. And the fact that we are doing this at a state level means we have great flexibility to design an institution that reflects the values and interests of Pennsylvanians. So whatever route we choose, it's doable, and it's going to reflect our interests here as opposed to interest in California or New York.
Now, with any issue, especially dealing with state budget issues, you're dealing with tax revenue. And we come into a time where people don't want to raise taxes to fund government programs, so then people turn to sin taxes. We've seen legalization of gambling, fireworks, other things that in the past have been illegal. Dan, do you think that despite a lot of the concerns that you've talked about, do you think tax revenue is enough to allay those concerns?
Well, again, ask the families that are dealing with the health costs. And I don't think the revenue is going to be something that, as they look at their son or daughter that is harmed by these drugs, as something that's worthwhile. And again, I think when it comes to this, Governor Shapiro certainly was all talking legalized marijuana. Technically, we do have legal from a medical perspective, so we do have already in the state. But I think from a revenue standpoint, what about the costs? Why don't we talk about estimates of healthcare costs? Homelessness, crime, these things, that's what you see in legalized states. You're seeing in Colorado. You look up the West Coast. I mean, California, the illicit market's thriving. Oregon, tried to say, okay, how are we going to, help people? Let's decriminalize all drugs, heroin, meth, cocaine. That was a disaster. They saw overdose rising, skyrocketing, the most of any state. Homelessness was going up. And so they just this year went back to recriminalizing those things. And so it's kind of the question, what do you do with drug policy? I think it's interesting, too, going up the West Coast, too, Washington State. Seattle Times, looking at their editorial board, has had numerous articles highlighting the issues of particularly high-potency marijuana. Seattle, their government did a study. It was implemented when they started in 2012, the legalization, this experiment with recreational use. 10 years later, they kind of looked, okay, what's happened? And so much they pointed at the high potency, the rise in these concentrates and edibles. It's over a third of the market, and we're still trying to figure out what this is doing to families and the healthcare system. And so there was recommendations of trying to, okay, how can we really limit the use of these high potency products? And so I would say, it's something, once you introduce the marijuana from a recreational purpose, now the kind of, the toothpaste out of the tube. In Seattle and all these places, they're trying to, okay, how can we fix this? Well, it's recognizing that today's marijuana of that high potency nature is very harmful, and trying to put limitations on what a commercialization would look like in our state, I think is a way to go.
Rob, if we're seeing legalization happen at the state level, but it's still the Schedule I drug at the federal level, how does that challenge work for law enforcement?
From a state level, not at all, because of and I do believe it's going to be Schedule III federally very soon. There's argument after the election on December 2nd with regards to that change. But that being said, it's not going to change it at all. I don't think legalization in Pennsylvania is going to happen before the national, it becomes Schedule III rather than Schedule I, but that's just my personal opinion. A lot of people think differently. It's going to happen sooner. It does give a green light to, and I take that back. It's not going to affect enforcement. What it will affect is driving. I'll be legal to drive then, because I'm not driving high. I'm driving because I have metabolites in my system. I would if I've used in the past month. I would have metabolites in my system because the DUI statute creates because it's a Schedule I drug. Because it wouldn't be a Schedule I drug anymore, I would be legal to drive. Same thing would be very similar to firearms. Not exactly, but it's too complicated. I won't go into it. But so federally, it would be legal for me to have firearms. But you don't want me to go into that. But it's coming.
Representative Dan Frankel proposed an idea of creating a state store system similar to what we have for wine and liquor. Do you think that's a good idea? Would that be better than, say, a private market system?
I think a state store system would be good for beverages. The beverage cannabis industry is exploding, and because of the distribution system we have, the 3-tier system from the manufacturer, distributor, and then the retailer, I think that's a good process for the beverage industry when it comes to cannabis. But when it comes to the dispensary, I think dispensary models seems to be working well, and people have invested a lot in this dispensary model, and I think it works really well. And one thing I just want to talk about real quick with regards to the cannabis and whether you're willing to take on these harms, marijuana has always been here. I mean, it's not because kids are actually doing less. Studies are showing youth are doing less marijuana or less cannabis in states that have legalized adult use than the ones that haven't. And even before anyone even talked about legalizing cannabis, kids did cannabis. It's not going away. Okay, if we make it illegal and stop it, I mean, that's how we stopped everyone doing fentanyl, told them it was illegal. It's still going to happen. So legalizing a safe, harm reduction drug, and I have to say this with regard, because I mentioned fentanyl. I have seen firsthand so many people that have told me firsthand that they have stopped using fentanyl, they stopped using alcohol, they've stopped using heroin, especially opiates, because they got on the medical marijuana program. It's a harm reduction tool for people that are addicted to fentanyl. And I don't think anyone can argue we don't have a fentanyl problem or opioid problem. It's killing people. Cannabis has killed 0 people due to an overdose. None. You can't overdose on cannabis. At least no one's discovered how to yet. That being said, it is a huge harm reduction and should be used we should be getting people to use cannabis that have addictions to fentanyl and heroin to get them off of those drugs that are killing them, that are killing their lives and their families as a harm reduction. It would be change everything.
The evidence that we're seeing in other states does point to seeing commercialization does make an impact on use. The growing access, you're seeing more users. It's why Trulieve is spending so much in Florida right now to try to get a recreational use, because they know they can make a lot of money.
Yeah, that's not true.
It spent $83 million on a ballot initiative, which is crazy insane. They're using it because they see an open market. But when you look at this issue,
kids, is what you're saying?
so to just sell it from a recreational purpose in the state, you have, there's certainly data. You look, 2023 study from Temple University, looked at American Medical Association, states that have legalized from a youth perspective, they saw youth use go up. There's a variety of data that is widely accepted to show that, again, increasing access. When you have so many of the pot shops, Colorado has more pot shops than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. When you do that, you're infiltrating a whole market. My kids are going to see that. You're going to start seeing the prevalency. You start to see the Facebook ads of things when it comes from a commercialization product. I'll go back to, when we talk on the types of programs that we have from a medical standpoint. When we legalized that in our state, I'm over in Harrisburg. I'm often over at the Capitol. And there were many families that were coming in to say, hey, we're seeing evidence or trying to see that marijuana might help my kid with epilepsy or some type of sickness. And that's what drew the lawmakers to say, you know what, let's fully legalize. I think, again, there's some parameters I'd still put in with medical, but there is something we said, okay, let's try to help people. Right now, who I'm seeing in Harrisburg, people like me, men in suits that are hired by marijuana companies to lobby Republicans, Democrats to see this happen because those companies can make a lot of money. That's who I'm seeing. I'm seeing at the rallies taking place. I stood next to a guy that's got a big weed hat. And men coming in, they're part of organizations, companies that are looking to profit off of this. So we have before, let's try to help people through a medical program. Right now, what I'm seeing is we're trying to just make a lot of money off of this. And frankly speaking, when it comes to the users of marijuana, the ones that they're profiting off of, a lot of them are the habitual users, daily users. The last 20 years, marijuana use has doubled and daily use has quadrupled. And that's looking at data from some SAMHSA, looking at just survey trends. Why is that? Why have so many people started to use more of it? And I think you can draw attention. What has changed? One huge change has been the commercialization, seeing more companies coming in, and the rise in THC. You've got chemists that are trying to get as high of a THC content because they can make more money off of that. You're seeing a profit-driven industry coming into those states experimenting with legalization for recreational purposes, and that's what I don't want to see in Pennsylvania.
Kara, Dan just mentioned lobbyists in Harrisburg. Are you seeing the same thing, the same trend as you're covering some of these events?
There's definitely interest from the commercialization. I have also seen a lot of rallies and groups of people. I know the Pennsylvania Black Legislative Caucus held a rally during kind of like final budget season, and it was a lot of, minority communities, all sorts of communities, the everyday people, the everyday users that are showing up and are also asking, again, for that just less confusion. And I think that is the thing with institutions, as we've seen over these 10 years, as we are all trying to figure this out. Can you do it well? How do you do that well in a government aspect? Because it's one thing to greenlight a program and go for it, and we've seen with Pennsylvania and medical marijuana that we greenlit that program, and now there's still issues, and years later we still haven't fixed those issues. So if you want to take on the recreational use, how are you going to create that institution well? And there are lots of, again, multiple parties involved, definitely. There's definitely things to profit from, and those lobbyists are available. But there are also people who are having that everyday use. I've talked to small business owners who are wanting to try and get boots on the ground to get something started with this. They're trying to get those business licenses. They're concerned, again, that they're trying to incorporate medical marijuana into their life in the way that they know how to do, and they still have concerns, they still have anxiety, because there is that inconsistency on how we're doing this and how we're approaching this as a state. And so that is, Harrisburg is a big place with multiple parties involved.
Now, with legalization comes big questions about what to do with people who have already been convicted of marijuana possession or marijuana use. Rob, is there a way to go back and expunge people's criminal records?
Sure.
What do you think about that?
Sure. And just follow up on Kara's point, I agree completely that and not only is it we haven't fixed the problem yet, it's getting worse. It's getting worse with the black market. It's getting worse because of our failure to regulate the cannabis industry, like alcohol. We're back in the 30s right now when alcohol was, and Al Capone was around when alcohol was illegal. And you're creating a bad black market that is, and it's being exponentialized because our failure to regulate the cannabis industry. With regards to expunging records, it'll be real easy. In fact, I was telling people I drop stuff to disorderly conduct. Now what I'm doing is dropping them to small amount of marijuana and they get the fine. But they also get the benefit of what I think is going to happen, and what's more than likely going to happen if adult use is legalized, that they're going to automatically expunge all the small amount of marijuanas. Those are easy to do. It's easy to say, okay, this number statute, we're expunging all small amounts of marijuana. The problem is you also have what's called paraphernalia, the pot pipe. Someone has 3 pipes, and you get charged 3 times for a pot pipe. You got papers, you got whatever you have is paraphernalia. Well, paraphernalia is paraphernalia, and and it's the same as meth or fentanyl or heroin. It's still is it a heroin pipe or was it a pot pipe? Who knows? It's paraphernalia. So expunging those types of records will be much more difficult. With expunging the small amounts of marijuana, it's just a stroke of the pen, and then automatically all go away. Just put it in the computer. So, and for as PWIDs and things like that would be, PWID is possession with intent to deliver. That's another issue. Are you going to be expunging records for someone who made money off of selling marijuana when it was illegal? I mean, it was still illegal and they made money off of people. So that's a different question, but it'd be easy to do for small amounts of marijuana.
Now, Joe, you mentioned that marijuana is legal in 24 states. And has legalizing it had any impact on organized crime? Are we seeing any impact in that area?
That's a question I don't know the answer to, quite simply.
Rob?
Yeah, absolutely.
The illicit market is certainly thriving in states that
Absolutely.
have commercialization, that have from a recreational purpose. California is dealing with it in leaps and bounds. New York City, I mean, it's the rollout that they did in New York was pretty awful in terms of the illicit market. But again, when you have the cover really of recreational use, there's always going to be appeal for a cheaper product. The illicit market has not gone away in any state that has legalized. And so I think what is helpful is from the conversation, having the different options. You talk about decriminalization. And I think, Dr. Morris, you guys have done some polling and some study. And what I appreciate looking through some of that is you gave some options. Oftentimes we just kind of say, hey, do you want recreational use of marijuana or just recreational marijuana? Often we think, well, I don't want to throw somebody in jail for smoking a joint. So yes, I guess I got to support the recreational use. And there should be a multifaceted discussion where we can have improvements to our criminal justice system. We can do changes in our court process and how we arrest and in a variety of things. There's ways to also from expunging records. Let's look at changes that we can make to a criminal justice system. That should be a separate discussion from allowing the commercialization of high potency marijuana throughout the state. And so I think if you have that discussion from medical, criminal justice, the recreational purposes, if you kind of separate a lot of those, you start to see, well, there might be more support, from a decriminalization perspective versus the full-on legalization of marijuana for recreational use.
How wouldn't the black market increase if I can grow marijuana in California, bring it to Pennsylvania and sell it for 5 times the cost? Of course, it's increased the black market. It's going to increase the black market until the government provides regulation legalizing it. The same exact way Al Capone made lots of money in the 30s because it was illegal. Once you make it legal, it's much easier to control. There's not too many bathtub distilleries that people are making whiskey in their basement. And if they are, they're doing it as a hobby and not selling it out. It's regulation that will stop the black market. People use the prohibitionists use the argument that we're increasing the black market because we're making adult use legal. Well, no, you're not. You are. But if you did it as a whole, and the federal government got on board, which they are now, and going to make it Schedule 3, and eventually the states get on board. If New York is illegal to have marijuana and we can have it in Pennsylvania, we're going to go across the border and sell it to New York residents. That's the black market. That's going to happen. That's why regulation is necessary, so as the government, we can control it and keep away from kids and regulate the high THC and make sure the people that are getting it are using it responsibly.
Well, again, the makers of bills here in the state that are looking to bring on this commercialization will say we're going to eradicate the illicit market. Senator Sharif Street in Philadelphia, the black market is going to disappear if we pass this bill. That's what other states have said. We still see a thriving illicit market. It's pointing at our state to say we're going to eradicate the black market when no other state has done that. It's just one of the fallacies that we're seeing in those that are trying to drive this recreational use of marijuana. It's just not what we're seeing in other states. So let's try to look at the evidence from these other states. One thing is, if you're trying to do this from an illicit market, that's not working in these other states.
Joe, Dan was talking about some of the choices that people have to make where maybe they don't want to throw somebody in jail, but they're not necessarily for legalization. How detailed do the studies get in terms of looking at some of these conflicts that people may have?
Well, our work at the Center for Applied Politics looked at the difference between legalizing medical marijuana, decriminalization, and legalization of recreational marijuana. And Pennsylvanians are not necessarily unique, but one of the hallmarks of Pennsylvania public opinion is that Pennsylvanians are incredibly empathetic. If there's someone that is suffering, Pennsylvanians are more than willing to help them out. And this isn't something you see in every state. It's who we are as a people, and I think it's a wonderful attribute. So back 10 years ago, we saw a great deal of support for medical marijuana, when medical marijuana was still something that was being debated across the United States. There was lots of concern about whether it was a good direction to go or not. Even in those circumstances, Pennsylvanians were very empathetic. They supported medical marijuana for quite a while. This was pretty deep support. So when we're looking at it today in terms of recreational marijuana, I'm not sure how that empathy is going to play out. But one thing that we do know with absolute certainty, as much certainty as we can, is that Pennsylvanians are today more supportive of legalization than at any time in our history. And if this was just a democracy, then we would expect that the good outcome would be legalization of recreational marijuana. But we live in a republic where ideally we have demands coming from the people, and those demands are then considered in a very thoughtful way, exploring all of the data and all of the options by representatives. And then the people are given what they want, but perhaps in a modified form, one that ideally makes it better. Their demands are translated into a program that will actually work. And the debate we're having today is, I think, exactly that going on. These demands, it seems to me, are ultimately going to be met. It's just a question of What does that program look like in this state? There are some estimates that suggest that within a 5-year period of legalizing marijuana in this state, state revenues are going to be about $1 billion. That's an enormous amount of money that can be used to do a lot of good work across the state. So this is a serious question for us. To what extent are we willing to follow public opinion, do the right thing by democracy, but at the same time do the thing that's in the long-term interest of the state, and that is have a good policy that works well and gives us the potential to do some good down the road with lots and lots of tax revenue.
I think if I could follow up, certainly, seeing people across communities trying to care for each other, from a medical standpoint, I think many are going to say, okay, how can we help others? What we're seeing now is there's doctors by the tens of thousands, basically just rubber stamping those medical cards. I think, again, when we analyze the medical program, a lot of those communities are going to say, we could do a better job of helping. So I think there are improvements there. But then also with communities, we see a lot of the legislation being proposed where essentially it's big government. You're going to say, your local township, you have to have a pot shop. There's no opt-out in these legislation. That's the industry, what they're doing now to really try to profit as much as possible. And so again, it's like, what do people want? I don't think the majority of communities want to say, yeah, I want a pot shop on my, corner store right next to it. I think they're trying to see how can we help people. So I think we should be analyzing that medical program. And then I think really when you get down to it, if you have the conversations, criminal justice, improvements that can be made, and really seeing what commercialization is in some of these states and the harms that it brings, that conversation can look different. So I think it's, again, where the conversation's more, it needs to happen more, certainly in Harrisburg and others. But some of those problems, I think, need to be highlighted.
What are we hearing from the substance abuse treatment community about the possibility of legalization?
Well, I'd say certainly the Commonwealth Prevention Alliance in our state here, drug and alcohol groups from across the state. You have, addiction treatment associations that are opposed to the legalization of marijuana from a recreational standpoint. They're recognizing, again, they're putting the lens of public health. What are we seeing in these other states? We're seeing this rise, again, mental health concerns and a slew of different health issues. So you should kind of question, why does American Academy of Pediatrics oppose? Why does Association of Addiction Treatment Professionals, why are they opposed to this? Why are even groups like AAA, opposed? Or editorial boards, oftentimes can be opposed. So they're looking at the evidence, they're seeing some of these health concerns. And if we look at it through that lens, yes, there should be certainly concerns with a commercialization of this drug.
Rob,
Can I just reply that quick? Because the reason they're opposed, cannabis might help fix them. They want them on Suboxone and methadone, not cannabis, to help them get off the real severe drug issue that they have. But
it also it still recognizes that marijuana itself is very harmful.
That's false.
You need to have that lens.
That's false.
It's, again, I talk with treatment facilities.
So do
I have a friend, Jordan, that was addicted to marijuana, and it absolutely has health implications. It's just not accurate. It's stuck in the 30s mentality of saying it's not harmless, that it's not harmful. This absolutely is causing
I would even
impact on
argue it's
families.
helpful more than harmful. But there are harms to it. But the health benefits are better overall, even without a medical condition.
The industry would like you to think that, and they're wanting to profit off of the addictive use of this drug.
I think the research has shown.
Rob, if marijuana is legalized, should there be dedicated funding for substance abuse treatment?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this isn't I'm not saying there's no harms to cannabis anything that you abuse or use too much can be harmful. You need to balance your cannabis, have a cannabis and balance program where you're balancing what you're doing. The same thing with exercise and the same thing with eating Big Macs and the same thing. You can use anything too much. And cannabis is an intoxicant and does make you feel a way that if you feel that way all the time, you're going to have issues. So absolutely there should be treatment facilities, but that money should also be used for helping people to get off fentanyl, to get off heroin, and whether it's pointing them to cannabis or abstention from all drugs or intoxicants, that's the way our country needs to go. We have a huge hard drug problem, and cannabis is not part of it. It could be the solution.
The CDC would absolutely disagree. There are so many health harms. with
So
it.
before we wrap up, I just want to give everybody an opportunity for one final thought. Dan, why don't you get us started?
Well, again, I think when you look at this conversation, in Pennsylvania, we do have legalized marijuana. We have a medical program. And it does look more like a recreational purpose when you're talking about 85, 90% THC that can be vaped. And we're seeing more and more of our peers that are having health harms. I'm talking with too many families that are going through the process of spending so much on treatment to try to find an answer for this. And it's because we have an industry commercializing this product of trying to say, let's try to get as much THC as possible out of these products. And it's something that, again, I don't want to welcome in our state because there's evidence. When you see the billboards and the advertising, do a science, when you look at a study to say in the last 20 years, what's changed? And when you go from single-digit THC to 30%, when you go from no vaping to now vaping 90% THC in that time frame, marijuana is not a constant. That is something that is going to impact your communities. And we're seeing some of that health harms, yet some are just trying to say, let's just jump in with recreational use and try to get as much money as we can on this. And that's not what I want to see in the state.
Kara?
I think this continues to be a big talking point in politics, in government, and conversation for elected officials. I mean, especially going into this November, it's something people are still talking about. I think I continue to think of, with institutions, how can we do this well? And especially in Harrisburg, in governments, it's easy to get caught up in ideology from either side of things, that I've been told this, I am being told this, whether it's from, grassroots organizers or from big companies who want to make money out of this. How can lawmakers push out, the wrong voices, use common sense, use practicality to look at the situation that's in front of us in our state? How can we best serve the citizens of Pennsylvania? What are we looking for and what's going to help them? I think of commercialization as well. Social media, we all know, is more and more terrible in lots of ways, and we can also use it for business and expectations, multifaceted. Privatization is not always looking out for your best interest. I think there are concerns with that, but we also know that this product has things, can 100% help people. That's why medical marijuana exists. So, as citizens of Pennsylvania, I think that's the question going forward. How are we going to hold our state officials, our government, accountable to do the things that we want them to do, to look out for us in our communities and take care of us?
Rob?
Even if 100% of what Dan is saying is true, and it is a bad thing, I still think it should be absolutely legal. Why? Because of freedom. What Dan wouldn't argue with me is that it's worse than alcohol, or that it's worse or on the same level as fentanyl or heroin. It's something that is an intoxicant that people like to do, and even if there were all these bad things about it, just like alcohol and all and that is legal, freedom dictates that we live in the United States. As an adult, I should be able to use cannabis if I want to. That being said, I think it could be helpful more than harmful. Regulate, with all the issues they're talking about, regulation would help that. Legalization of adult use would help law enforcement to regulate it. It would help control the quality of the product. It would help control the consistency of the product so you know what you're getting. And it's been shown to reduce the use of youths, I guess, if you watch the movie, young people, because it's regulated just like alcohol. Are young people still going to get it? Yes, they always have. But now it's regulated and controlled so they're not getting fentanyl-laced marijuana. Thank you very much.
Joe?
Yeah, we've had, I think, a really robust debate, and we can't forget that that is due in no small measure to the states that have come before. Pennsylvania finds itself in the middle of what seems to be this national trend toward the legalization of recreational marijuana. And as this debate unfolds over the next year or two or maybe more, we will undoubtedly benefit, and we should strive to get as much as we can from those states that have already gone through much of what Pennsylvania is contemplating right now. With that said, I think that's it.
Well, our guests have been Joe Morris, Chair of the Political Science Department at Mercyhurst University, Rob Greene, District Attorney of Warren County, Kara Jeffers, Pennsylvania State Capitol reporter with Erie News Now, and Dan Bartkowiak, Communications Director for the Pennsylvania Family Institute. If you'd like more information about PCN's coverage of the 2024 election, visit pcntv.com. I'm Phil Beckman. Thank you for watching.